Welcome to the first Playdate firefighting game devlog, where I'm creating a game where you have to extinguish fires and save people from buildings. To do this, you have to pressurize the water in your hose using the Playdate's crank. To begin the week, I installed the Playdate SDK, which is as simple as ticking accept to the privacy policy and clicking download. You need to add the Playdate SDK to the system environment variables so that you can build your game to test. This is as simple as searching for environment variables and clicking edit the system environment variables and click environment variables at the bottom of the window under system variables. Clicking new, typing in Playdate _SDK _path as the name and the location that your SDK is installed to. By default, that's the documents folder inside a folder called Playdate SDK. You should also find the path system variable, press edit, then new, and paste the location of your SDK followed by \bin. This allows you to call PDC from any terminal on your machine and build your game. Speaking of the game, I started working on creating the main scene where the meat of the game will play. So to start, I needed to create a building. I created the windows of the building by using a simple nested for loop. The second loop loops through the number of columns, which is the number of windows per row. To draw the windows, I used the Playdate graphics library to draw a rectangle at some x and y coordinates, followed by two size attributes, which is the length and width of the window. It then increases the x coordinates to move to the next column or window, and once the row is complete, it resets the x to the start of the row and increases the y to start the new row. And this happens until both loops have completed. This ends with a 4x4 grid of squares, which is a start to our building. To add the fire to the windows, I decided to make use of the Playdate core library object to make my windows objects so that they can hold data such as their location and whether they're on fire or not. To do this, I imported the object library and created a class which takes a name, followed by any parameters for the window, and finished with .extends, which allows it to inherit from a main class. If you leave it blank, then its default is to extend from the objects class from the objects library. We then need to create the initialize function, which is function window init, and whatever properties you want to be defined immediately. I use isOnFire to tell me whether the window is on fire or not, the x and y positions of the window, the size of the window, and the number of the window, which will be used to identify windows for fire spreading later in the project. You then need to call your class .super.init self. This is to initialize the parent object. You pass through self, as you can then use self to access your object's parameters from within. I then set all of the necessary parameters to the values passed through, and the window draws itself and returns the window, which is then added to a window array so it can be accessed later. I also added an update function, which currently just calls the draw function, and a function to toggle the fire on and off respectively by changing the isOnFire bool. To create the fire, I created a function which takes the x and y positions of the fire as well as the window that it's in. I then create a new sprite using the Playdate sprites library, set the image, I then set the position of the fire and add the sprite to the world. I then check if the window is on fire, and if it's not, I set the fire to be invisible, and finally add the fire to the fire array, which allows us to edit it later. The final thing that I played with this week was the buttons. The Playdate has a button down and a button release function, so in the B and A button down functions, I created a quick block of code which will select a random window and either set it on fire or extinguish it. I also added moving the camera up and down so that you can see taller buildings. However, the button down functions only trigger once when you press the button, even if the button is held down. This was a problem because the D-pad buttons don't have a button held function, so to resolve this, I found that there is a Playdate function called button is pressed, which returns true as long as the button is pressed or held down. So in my update function, I just added a couple of if statements which check if the up or down button is pressed and increments the camera Y position up or down. I then call the set draw offset, given the new location, and the camera moves. Finally, in my update function, I call the sprite update function and then the draw building function, which is a function I created to loop through all of the windows and call their update functions. Thank you for watching this first Playdate devlog. If you have any projects that you're working on, feel free to share them, and if you have any tricks for me or tips and tricks, feel free to share them and let me know. And I will see you in the next devlog. Cheerio.